Opening. Imagine standing at the edge of the ocean. Not a beach, Not a shoreline with hotels and footprints and the sound of children playing in the shallows. Something older. A coast before any of that existed. Just rock and water, and the slow movement of waves that have been coming in from the open sea for longer than you can hold in your mind. You are standing at the edge, and somewhere out there in the dark water, in the deep, something is moving. You cannot see it yet, but you can feel it, almost. The sense that the ocean is not empty, that it never has been. That beneath the surface of the water, in a world governed by entirely different rules of pressure and sound and darkness and the slow, patient rhythms of creatures evolved for depth, something extraordinary is happening. Something that has been happening for 50 million years. And that, if you are very still, very quiet, and willing to simply listen, you can almost hear. Close your eyes. Let the sound of the water come to you. Not waves crashing. Not the bright, chaotic sound of a surf beach. Something deeper. The low, resonant sound of open water. Of depth, of distance. Settle into it. Let the weight of the day fall away. Tonight, we are going into the ocean, not to the surface, not to the bright, familiar world of coral and shallow sunlight. Deeper, into the world of whales, into one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of life on Earth. Chapter 1. From Land to Sea. 50 million years ago, there was no such thing as a whale. Not yet. Where the great ocean animals now swim, where blue whales move through the cold waters of the Southern Ocean, where sperm whales dive into darkness deeper than most aircraft fly, there was something else. Something small. Something that walked. The ancestors of whales were land mammals. This is not a poetic metaphor. This is one of the most well-documented evolutionary transitions in the fossil record, a transformation so complete, so thorough, so seemingly improbable, that it took scientists a long time to fully accept what the bones were telling them. Approximately 50 to 55 million years ago, in the warm, shallow seas that covered what is now Pakistan and India, a group of small, hoofed mammals, relatives of modern even-toed ungulates, the group that includes deer and hippos, began spending more time in the water. Perhaps it was food. The shallow coastal waters were rich in fish, in invertebrates, in the kind of easy nutrition that rewarded animals willing to wade in and get wet. Perhaps it was refuge. Water offers protection from predators that cannot follow. Whatever the reason, they went in, and they did not entirely come back out. The first of these transitional creatures we know well is called Pachycetus. It lived approximately 50 million years ago. It looked, from a distance, something like a large, heavy dog, a terrestrial animal, clearly. But its skull, particularly the structure of its inner ear, shows the first traces of the anatomical changes that would eventually produce animals capable of hearing underwater. It was a land animal, but it was listening to the water. After Pachycetus came Ambulocetus, the walking whale. A creature that could move on land, but was increasingly at home in the water. Its limbs were positioned to allow it to move through water with an undulating motion, not yet the side-to-side motion of a fish, but a vertical undulation, the same motion that modern whales use when swimming. The earliest trace of what would become one of the most efficient swimming motions ever evolved. Then Rhodocetus, more aquatic, shorter hind limbs, a tail that was beginning to develop in ways that suggested something that would come much later. The transition took millions of years, but it was happening, step by step, generation by generation. The land was being left behind. By 35 million years ago, the animals we would recognize as ancestral whales, Basilosaurus and its relatives, were fully aquatic. Enormous, elongated serpentine creatures, up to 18 meters long, moving through the ancient Tethys Sea with a sinuous power that would have been unmistakable. Their hind limbs were still present, but vestigial, reduced to small, functionless appendages carried inside the body, evolutionary memory of a life on land that was now tens of millions of years in the past. They could not walk. They could not stand. The land was gone. The ocean was everything. Chapter 2. The two lineages. From those ancient ancestors, two great lineages of whales eventually emerged. They diverged approximately 34 million years ago, and they diverged so completely, so thoroughly, in their approach to the business of being enormous ocean animals that it is almost difficult to believe they share a common ancestor. The baleen whales and the toothed whales. The baleen whales, the mysticetes, abandoned teeth entirely. In place of teeth, they developed one of the most extraordinary biological filters ever evolved: baleen plates. Hundreds of overlapping plates of keratin, the same material as human fingernails, hanging from the upper jaw like the bristles of an enormous comb. These plates allowed the baleen whales to do something no other large animal had ever done quite so efficiently: to feed on the smallest things in the ocean. Krill, copepods, small fish, creatures measured in millimeters, consumed by the ton. The blue whale, the largest animal that has ever lived on Earth, in all 4.5 billion years of life on this planet, sustains its 150-ton body by filter feeding on krill. Krill, organisms smaller than your thumbnail, consumed in quantities of up to 4 tons per day. The geometry of this is almost impossible to hold in the mind. The largest animal in the history of life on Earth, sustained entirely by some of the smallest. The toothed whales, the odontocetes, went in a different direction. They kept their teeth, and they developed something else. Something that, in all of evolutionary history, had never existed quite like this before. Echolocation. The ability to perceive the world through sound, to produce clicks, rapid, precisely controlled pulses of sound, and to interpret the returning echoes with such accuracy that the shape, size, distance, texture, and movement of objects in the surrounding water become as clear as sight. Clearer, in some circumstances, because in the darkness of the deep ocean, in the total absence of light, sound is the only sense that matters. The toothed whales, from the massive sperm whale to the tiny harbor porpoise, navigate, hunt, communicate, and understand their world through echolocation. They see with sound. In a world of darkness, they build a different kind of vision. Chapter 3. The Anatomy of Giants. A whale is not simply a large fish. It is something far more interesting than that. It is a mammal, warm-blooded, air-breathing, giving birth to live young and nursing them on rich, fatty milk that has been so thoroughly redesigned by millions of years of evolution for life in the ocean that it has become something with no true parallel anywhere in the animal kingdom. The flukes, the horizontal tail fins of whales, are not bones. They are cartilage and dense connective tissue, extending outward from the vertebral column with no bony support, shaped by evolution into a form of extraordinary hydrodynamic efficiency. The up and down motion of the flukes, that powerful vertical stroke, is the legacy of the land ancestors. Land mammals run with a vertical spine flexion. That flexion, carried into the water, became the engine of whale locomotion. It is one of the most efficient forms of movement, ever evolved. A blue whale, cruising at its ordinary traveling speed of around 20 kilometers per hour, consumes less energy per unit of distance than almost any other large animal. It is built for the long run, for crossing oceans, for migrations of 10,000 kilometers and more. The blowhole, the nostril of whales, relocated over millions of years from the front of the face to the top of the head, is one of the most elegant solutions in evolutionary history. An animal that needs to breathe air but spends its life in the water cannot afford to lift its entire head above the surface every time it needs to take a breath. The blowhole allows a whale to breathe with the briefest interruption, a surfacing, an exhale, an inhale measured in seconds before returning to the water. The visible blow, the column of mist that rises from a surfacing whale, is the exhalation. Warm, moist air from the lungs, meeting the cooler air above the surface, condensing into the cloud of vapor that has told sailors and whale watchers where whales are for as long as humans have gone to sea. Each species has a distinctive blow. The sperm whale's blow angles forward, and to the left, an artifact of the animal's asymmetric skull. The blue whale's blow rises straight up, sometimes 10 meters into the air. The right whale's V-shaped double blow, from its two blowholes, visible from kilometers away. A signature, written in water and air. The skin of whales is another study in extraordinary adaptation. Smooth, nearly hairless, maintained in a state of constant renewal, the outer layer replaced far more rapidly than in most mammals, reducing drag in the water by maintaining a surface that is, at the microscopic level, extraordinarily smooth. Beneath the skin, blubber, not fat in the ordinary sense. A specialized tissue, a layer that can reach 30 centimeters in thickness in some species that serves simultaneously as insulation against cold water, as energy storage for long migrations in which feeding may be minimal, and as a buoyancy aid that helps maintain position in the water column. In the blue whale, the blubber layer stores enough energy to sustain the animal through months of migration and fasting. An internal ocean, of sorts, carrying summer with it into the winter sea. Chapter 4. The voices beneath the waves. Sound travels differently in water than in air. Faster, much faster, and further. In the open ocean, sound can travel for thousands of kilometers before it fades below detectable levels. This is not speculation, it is a phenomenon that has been measured and studied in detail since the mid-20th century. The ocean is not silent. It has never been silent. And the whales knew this, or rather, were shaped by it long before we did. Humpback whales sing, "This is not a casual use of the word." The songs of male humpback whales are among the most complex vocalizations produced by any non-human animal. They are structured compositions, sequences of sounds organized into phrases, phrases organized into themes, themes organized into songs that can last for 20 minutes and are then repeated in full again and again for hours. Every male humpback in a given population sings the same song, and the song changes. Not randomly, not chaotically, it evolves. Over the course of a breeding season, the song changes, new phrases introduced, old ones modified, the structure shifting in ways that all males track and incorporate simultaneously. A communale composition, a living piece of music, created by thousands of animals, evolving in real time across an ocean. We do not fully understand what it means. We do not know, with certainty, why they sing. But we know the songs are real. We know they are complex. We know they spread across populations, a new phrase appearing in one part of the ocean, spreading westward through the population over the following months, until the entire ocean sings it. Culture, transmitted through sound, across thousands of kilometers of open water. Blue whales produce the loudest sounds of any animal on Earth. Their calls, low-frequency pulses, often below the range of human hearing, travel at up to 188 decibels, louder than a jet engine at close range. These calls can travel for hundreds of kilometers in favorable ocean conditions, perhaps further. The purpose is communication. Over the vast distances of the open ocean, where two blue whales might be separated by hundreds of kilometers of water, low-frequency sound is the only reliable medium for making contact. They are calling to each other, across distances that dwarf anything in human experience. Patient, persiste. In frequencies we cannot hear without instruments, across distances we cannot cross without machines. Conversations happening right now, in the deep ocean, between animals we will never fully understand. Sperm whales use a different system entirely. Their clicks, rapid pulses produced by the largest sound-producing organ of any animal, a structure called the spermaceti organ that fills much of the enormous, rectangular head, are the tools of echolocation. But sperm whales also communicate in patterns of clicks called codas, distinctive rhythmic sequences that vary between social groups. Different groups have different codas. They can be taught, learned, passed from older animals to younger ones. Sperm whales, in other words, have dialects, the acoustic equivalent of a regional accent, a mark of identity, of belonging, of where you come from and who raised you. Chapter 5. The Intelligence of the Ocean. Intelligence is difficult to define, and it is even more difficult to measure across the boundary between species, between animals whose minds are organized so differently from our own that the usual tests and comparisons become almost meaningless. But there are signs, behaviors that suggest something more than instinct, something that looks, from the outside, remarkably like thought. Whales have large brains, extremely large brains. The sperm whale has the largest brain of any animal that has ever lived, approximately 8 kilograms, 6 times the weight of a human brain. But raw size is not the measure. What matters is structure. And in whale brains, particularly in the great baleen whales and the sperm whale, scientists have found something unexpected: spindleneurons, a type of neuron previously thought to be found only in humans and great apes, associated in humans with social cognition, empathy, and self-awareness, found in whale brains, in regions analogous to the areas where they appear in human brains. What this means, what it tells us about the inner experience of a whale, we cannot say with certainty. But it suggests that the neural architecture for complex social and emotional processing is not unique to primates. It evolved independently in the ocean. Dolphins, the smaller members of the toothed whale family, have been studied more extensively than their larger relatives simply because they are more accessible. And what has been found is remarkable. Bottlenose dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors. This is one of the standard tests for self-awareness, the ability to understand that the reflection is oneself, not another animal. Only a handful of species pass it. Humans, great apes, elephants, magpies, and dolphins. Dolphins learn. They pass knowledge between individuals not through instinct, but through observation and imitation. In Shark Bay, Australia, a population of dolphins has learned to use sea sponges as tools, placing them on their rostrums to protect themselves while foraging on the sea floor. The behavior is passed from mothers to daughters. Tool use, cultural transmission, across generations. In the ocean, orca societies, orcas being the largest member of the dolphin family, are organized around stable, multi-generational family groups. A female orca may live for 90 years. She knows the ocean she was born in. She knows its seasonal patterns, its food resources, its dangers. She teaches. Younger animals in her group learn from her. The location of prey, the techniques of hunting, the complex social rules of the group. Post-reproductive female orcas who can no longer breed but continue to live for decades, provide navigational knowledge and decision-making experience that younger animals lack. Their presence increases the survival rates of their grandchildren during difficult conditions. Grandmothers carrying knowledge across generations. In the cold waters of the Pacific. Chapter 6. The Migration. Every year, an extraordinary movement happens. Not in one place, not in one ocean. Simultaneously, across the world's oceans, whales are moving, following routes that have been traveled for millions of years. Routes written, somehow, into the biology of each animal in magnetic sensitivity, in memory, in the social transmission of knowledge passed from older animals to younger ones across generations. Humpback whales make some of the longest migrations of any mammal on Earth. From the cold, nutrient-rich feeding grounds of the polar and subpolar regions where the summer explodes in abundance, where krill swarm in quantities almost impossible to imagine to the warm, calm waters of the tropics and subtropics, where they breed, where they give birth, where calves are born into warm water that gives them the best chance of survival before the long journey north begins. The distance from the Antarctic feeding grounds to the breeding lagoons of the Pacific can exceed 10,000 kilometers. 10,000 kilometers. Each way, the whales make this journey every year, in both directions, with a precision of navigation that we are still trying to fully understand. They travel without maps, without instruments, without anything except the accumulated biology of millions of years of evolution, and perhaps the accumulated knowledge passed down from mothers and grandmothers who have made this journey before. Gray whales make the longest recorded migration of any mammal. From the rich feeding grounds of the Arctic, the Bering and Chukchi seas, where the summer produces an extraordinary abundance of small crustaceans in the sediment, to the warm lagoons of Baja California. A round trip of approximately 20,000 kilometers every year. Since before the modern coastline of North America existed, the journey is not easy. Whales lose up to a third of their body weight during migration. They eat little or nothing during the journey. They rely on the blubber accumulated during the summer feeding season to fuel months of movement. The young born during the migration, or in the breeding grounds, must be strong enough to make the return journey north before they have had the opportunity to build the reserves their bodies will need. The first year is the hardest. The ocean does not accommodate the weak. But for those who make it, for those who learn the route, who build the reserves, who navigate the 10,000 kilometers and arrive, finally, in the cold water that pulses with life, the summer is extraordinary, an abundance that justifies everything. Chapter 7. The Deepest Dive. The surface of the ocean is where whales come to breathe, but the surface is not where they live. Sperm whales are the deepest diving animals on Earth. They dive to depths of over 3 kilometers. Some recorded dives exceed 3,000 meters in pursuit of their primary prey, giant squid living in the permanent darkness of the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones. A single dive can last 90 minutes. 90 minutes beneath the surface, descending in the early part of the dive at a speed of several meters per second. The pressure at 3 kilometers depth is over 300 times the pressure at the surface. The water is cold, dark, silent, except for the sounds of other deep-sea creatures and the clicking of the whale's own echolocation system probing the darkness ahead. How does a sperm whale survive this? The physiology is extraordinary. Before diving, a whale takes a series of breaths not hyperventilating, as a human might before diving, but slow, deliberate breaths that saturate the blood with oxygen while simultaneously removing carbon dioxide. The lungs, at depth, collapse. This is intentional. Rigid lungs would implode under the pressure. The collapsed lungs prevent the nitrogen narcosis and decompression sickness that would kill a human diver at a fraction of this depth. The blood and muscles of diving whales contain extraordinary concentrations of myoglobin, the molecule that stores oxygen in muscle tissue. Whale muscles are so rich in myoglobin that they are nearly black. The heart rate slows dramatically during a dive, from the resting surface rate to as few as 4 beats per minute at the deepest point. Blood is routed away from non-essential organs and concentrated in the brain and heart. The whale becomes, in effect, a different physiological state while diving, a version of itself optimized for depth, for darkness, for the extraordinary demands of a world 3 kilometers below the surface, and then it returns, ascending slowly, breaking the surface, exhaling that great visible blow, the warm vapor rising into the cold air, breathing, simply, completely breathing, unresting at the surface for a time, before going down again. Chapter 8. Whale falls when giants return to the earth. A whale dies. This happens, as all things happen, at the end of a life that may have lasted 50, 60, 70 years, or, in the case of the bowhead whale, potentially over 200. The body sinks, slowly, over hours or days. It descends through the water column, through the sunlit zone, through the twilight, into the darkness. And when it reaches the seafloor, something extraordinary begins. A whale fall. The body of a large whale resting on the ocean floor creates one of the most remarkable ecological events in the deep ocean. A sudden, enormous delivery of organic material to an environment where food is almost perpetually scarce. The colonization happens in stages. First, the mobile scavengers arrive. Sleeper sharks, hagfish, rat-tail fish drawn by chemical signals that spread through the water. They strip the soft tissue from the bones with a speed and efficiency that seems almost systematic. Then the enrichment opportunists, smaller organisms, polychaete worms, crustaceans colonize the bones and the surrounding sediment. And then the most extraordinary stage. As bacteria break down the lipids stored in the whale's bones, they produce hydrogen sulfide. And around the whale fall, over a period of years and decades, a chemosynthetic community establishes itself, the same kind of community found around hydrothermal vents. Specialized organisms, living on chemical energy, independent of sunlight. A whale fall can support a unique ecosystem for decades. Some of the species found on whale falls are found nowhere else. Specialists evolved to exploit this specific, temporary, extraordinary resource. When a whale dies, it feeds a world, a hidden world, in the dark, for decades. Chapter 9. What whales tell us. Whales evolved from land. They filled the ocean. They grew to sizes never seen before or since in the history of life on Earth. They developed intelligence, communication, culture. They navigate 10,000 kilometers without instruments. They dive 3 kilometers and return. They carry the memory of their journeys in their bodies and pass it to their children. And they have been doing all of this for 50 million years. There is something that happens when you truly consider the whale, not as an object of observation, not as data, but as a subject. as a mine, moving through the ocean with full awareness of where it is and where it is going, calling to others of its kind across hundreds of kilometers of dark water, carrying knowledge of routes, of feeding grounds, of the particular social rules of its family group accumulated over a lifetime of 70 or 80 or 200 years, remembering, knowing, in ways we're only beginning to understand. The ocean is not empty. It is full of minds we cannot easily reach, moving through a world we cannot easily enter, living on timescales we cannot easily imagine, and yet here, sharing this planet, sharing these oceans, breathing the same air at the surface, in those brief, visible moments when their world and ours briefly overlap. Chapter 10. The Ocean. We are losing. There is something else we need to say before we sleep. Something that sits alongside the wonder. Not to end on darkness, not to replace the extraordinary with the difficult, but because the whales deserve to be seen whole, in the fullness of what they are, and in the fullness of what is happening to them. The great whales were hunted. For centuries, human beings have gone to sea in pursuit of whales. The earliest records of whale hunting stretch back thousands of years. Small boats, hand-thrown harpoons, the extraordinary courage and extraordinary violence of people willing to go out onto the open ocean in wooden vessels and pursue the largest animals on Earth. For most of that history, the hunt was sustainable. Not because the hunters were conservationists, but because the technology was limited. A man in a rowboat with a hand harpoon could not meaningfully reduce a global whale population of hundreds of thousands. That changed in the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution arrived in the ocean. Steam-powered vessels replaced sailing ships. Explosive harpoons fired from deck-mounted cannons replaced hand-thrown lances. Factory ships, enormous floating processing facilities, allowed whaling fleets to operate for months at a time in the most remote oceans on Earth, processing every whale caught before moving on to the next. The efficiency was extraordinary, and the consequence was catastrophic. The blue whale, which had existed in the Southern Ocean in numbers that may have reached 300,000 individuals, 300,000 of the largest animals that have ever lived, was reduced in less than 60 years of industrial hunting to perhaps 5,000. 5,000 from 300,000 in 60 years. The mathematics of this are almost impossible to absorb. 300,000 animals. Each one the largest creature on Earth, each one carrying in its body the product of 50 million years of evolution. Each one a mind we increasingly believe, of genuine complexity, reduced to 5,000 in the span of a single human lifetime. The humpback whale, reduced to fractions of its former numbers in ocean after ocean, population after population. The fin whale, the second largest animal on Earth, hunted so intensively in the Southern Ocean that its populations collapsed within decades. The right whale named with a grimness that is hard to contemplate, because it was the right whale to hunt, slow enough to chase, rich enough in oil to be worth the effort, obliging enough to float when dead rather than sinking. The right whale to kill. The North Atlantic right whale was hunted to near extinction centuries ago. It has never recovered. Today, the entire North Atlantic right whale population numbers fewer than 400 individuals. 400. An entire species, one of the most ancient, most extraordinary lineages of mammals on this planet, reduced to a population smaller than the capacity of a modest theater. We did this. Not in the deep geological past, not in some era before human beings understood consequences. We did this in the era of newspapers and photography and scientific understanding, in full knowledge for much of it, of what was being lost. This is worth sitting with for a moment, not with guilt that paralyzes, not with despair that disengages, but with the clear-eyed, uncomfortable recognition that these animals are not abstractions. They are not symbols. They are not metaphors for anything. They are real. They were here long before us. They were here in numbers we can barely imagine, and we nearly erased them. The hunting has largely stopped now. The International Whaling Commission, established in 1946, imposed a moratorium on commercial whaling in 1986. Most nations comply, some do not. The killing continues in limited form, but the populations that were devastated are recovering slowly. The humpback whale in the Southern Ocean has returned to numbers that offer genuine, cautious hope. From perhaps 5,000 individuals at the lowest point of their decline to perhaps 80,000 today, slowly, imperfectly. Against continued threats, ship strikes, entanglement in fishing gear, ocean noise that disrupts their communication, the warming and acidification of the oceans that is changing the distribution of the krill they depend on. But recovering, the blue whale remains critically endangered. Its recovery, if it is happening at all, is too slow to measure with confidence. An animal that reproduces slowly, a female blue whale may give birth to a single calf only once every 2 to 3 years, cannot bounce back quickly from the losses of the industrial whaling era. The North Atlantic right whale continues its precarious existence. Ship strikes, entanglement in fishing lines, a warming ocean pushing its prey northward into shipping lanes and fishing grounds, a population so small that the death of a single individual, a single whale, is a measurable setback to the species. We are still deciding what we are going to do about this. The answer is not yet clear, but the whales are still here, waiting in their patient way for us to decide. Chapter 11. The ocean as it is now. The ocean the whales live in today is not the ocean their ancestors entered 50 million years ago. It is not even the ocean of 100 years ago. It is changing faster than it has changed at almost any point in the last tens of millions of years. The ocean absorbs approximately 30% of the carbon dioxide released by human activity. This absorption, which is slowing the rate of climate change in the atmosphere, is changing the chemistry of the ocean itself. As carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid. The ocean is becoming more acidic. Not dramatically, not in ways that are immediately visible, but measurably, consistently, year by year. The shells of the small marine organisms that form the base of the ocean food web, the pteropods, the foraminifera, the tiny calcifying creatures that exist in almost incomprehensible numbers throughout the ocean, are becoming thinner, more fragile. In some regions, they are beginning to dissolve. The krill that humpback whales and blue whales depend on for their survival are changing their distribution as the ocean warms, moving south. In the Southern Ocean, as the waters they have always inhabited become too warm for the cold water species they feed on, moving north. In the Arctic, following the retreating ice edge, the whales are following, extending their ranges, appearing in waters where they have not been seen before, adapting, as they have always adapted, to a changing world. But the pace of change is not the pace of evolution. Evolution works across thousands and millions of generations. The ocean is changing across decades. The whales are intelligent, flexible, capable of learning and adapting in ways that few other animals can match. But there are limits, and the noise. The modern ocean is a noisy place. Shipping lanes crisscross every major ocean basin, carrying the low-frequency noise of enormous engines through water that transmits sound with extraordinary efficiency. Sonar, military sonar, in particular, produces sounds of such intensity that they have been documented causing strandings and deaths in beaked whales and other deep-diving species. The humpback whale, whose songs once traveled for hundreds of kilometers through quiet ocean, now sings in an ocean filled with the noise of a global shipping fleet. The effective range of its songs, the distance over which communication is possible, has been reduced, in some regions, to a fraction of what it was a century ago. They are still singing, but in a noisier world, their voices carry less far. This, too, is something we are still deciding what to do about. The whales cannot decide for us. They can only continue doing what they have always done, in whatever ocean we leave them. Chapter 12. What remains? And yet, despite everything, they are still here. This morning, somewhere in the North Pacific, a group of humpback whales surfaced in the early light. Their blows rose into the cold air, catching the first sun, visible from miles away to anyone who happened to be watching. They were feeding, moving slowly through water dense with krill, lunging and filtering, the ancient machinery of baleen and mussel working as it has worked for tens of millions of years. In the deep water of the North Atlantic, a sperm whale family group moved through the darkness. The matriarch, perhaps 60 years old, perhaps older, led. She knew this water. She had known it for decades. The roots, the depths where squid gathered, the particular patterns of current and temperature that her decades of experience had taught her to read as fluently as we read a page of text. Her daughters swam nearby. Her granddaughters. A family that has known each other their entire lives, moving through a world of sound and darkness and cold that we can barely imagine, together. In the Southern Ocean, a blue whale moved alone through water so vast and so cold that the concept of loneliness seems almost inapplicable. It called that enormous, low-frequency pulse generated in the largest sound-producing structure of any animal on Earth, traveling outward through the water in all directions, below the range of human hearing, without instruments, carrying meaning we cannot decode, across distances that dwarf anything in our experience. Perhaps another blue whale heard it. Perhaps not. The call continued anyway. Patient, persiste, ancien, as it has always been. In the Arctic, a bowhead whale moved slowly through the dark water beneath the ice. This animal may have been born before the American Civil War. It carries in its body harpoon points from hunts that took place before living memory. It has seen this ocean warm. It has watched the ice retreat, summer by summer, into waters where it has never retreated before in the animal's lifetime. It continues. Through the hunting and the noise and the warming and the loss, they continue, because they have no other option. And because 50 million years of evolution have made them extraordinarily good at continuing. But also, and this is something worth holding on to tonight, in the quiet, because they are still here, in numbers reduced, but not destroyed, in populations damaged, but not eliminated, in an ocean changed, but not yet beyond their capacity to inhabit, still calling to each other across hundreds of kilometers of dark water, still navigating by magnetic field and social memory across 10,000 kilometers of open ocean, still diving 3 kilometers into darkness and returning, still singing songs that spread across entire ocean basins, still nursing their young on milk richer than any land mammal produces, still carrying their grandmother's knowledge of routes and feeding grounds and the deep patterns of an ocean they have lived in for 50 million years. The whales do not need us to witness them to continue being extraordinary. They were extraordinary before we existed. But there is something in the act of witnessing that matters. Something in the choice to sit quietly in the darkness of a room at night and learn the names Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, Basilosaurus, and understand what they represent. To know that the blue whale's call travels at 188 decibels through water we will never swim in, reaching ears we cannot imagine, carrying meaning we cannot decode. To know this, and to feel something about it. That feeling, that mixture of wonder and humility, and something that might simply be called love. For a creature we will never truly meet in its own world is not nothing. It is, in fact, one of the most distinctly human things there is. The capacity to be astonished by something that has nothing to do with us. The capacity to care about a mind we cannot reach. The capacity to find the world larger and stranger and more alive than we expected. The whales give us that. Every time we learn something new about them, every time we sit quietly enough to imagine them out there, in the dark water, still calling, still here. Chapter 13. The Whale and the Human. We have been watching whales for a very long time. Long before the science. Long before the research vessels and the hydrophones and the satellite tags and the population surveys. Long before we understood what we were looking at. Human beings have been watching whales since we first arrived at the edge of the ocean and looked out at the water and saw something enormous moving beneath the surface. And we have been telling stories about them ever since. The ancient Greeks believed that whales were sea monsters, creatures of the deep sent by the gods to terrorize sailors and devour the unwary. The word they used, ketos, gives us the scientific name for the order of whales today. Cetacea, named for the monster. The Norse sailors of the medieval period told of the Hafgufa, a creature so vast that sailors would mistake it for an island, anchor their ships to its back, and light cooking fires before the beast submerged and dragged them to the bottom. The Kraken, the island that breathes. In the Pacific, many cultures understood the whale as a sacred being, an ancestor, a guardian of the ocean. Something to be approached with reverence rather than fear. The Inuit peoples of the Arctic developed one of the most sophisticated relationships with whales of any culture in human history. A relationship built not on fear or mythology, but on deep, practical, generations-long knowledge of whale behavior, whale movement, whale biology. Knowledge accumulated across centuries of living alongside and carefully hunting these animals in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. They knew the bowhead whale, knew its roots beneath the ice, knew the sounds it made, knew the particular way it surfaced at a breathing hole, knew how to read the ocean, the color of the water, the behavior of the birds, the direction of the wind to find an animal they could not see. This was not superstition. This was science. Empirical, accumulated, tested across generations and refined continuously against the evidence of the real ocean. In many ways, it was a more sophisticated understanding of the bowhead whale than Western science achieved until the 20th century. Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick in 1851. A book about a white sperm whale and the obsession it inspired in the captain who hunted it. The book is many things: a novel, a philosophical meditation, an extraordinarily detailed account of the 19th century whaling industry. But at its heart, it is about the same thing that has always drawn human beings to the whale: the sense of something vast and unknowable, something that exists by its own rules, in its own world, on its own terms. Something that does not acknowledge us, does not need us, does not know we exist in any meaningful sense. And that is Somehow, exactly the point. The whale's indifference to us is part of what makes it so compelling. We are accustomed to being the center of things, to living in a human world surrounded by human concerns, measured by human scales of time and importance. The whale reminds us that the world is not organized around us, that the ocean was here before us, that it is full of lives being lived on entirely different terms. That time in the ocean moves differently across the lifespans of bowhead whales that may live 2 centuries, across the evolutionary timescales of lineages 50 million years old. The whale does not care about our politics, our deadlines, our anxieties. It calls across the dark water. It dives into the darkness. It surfaces and breathes and goes down again. It has been doing this since before our species existed. And there is something in that, something in the sheer indifferent antiquity of it that is, if you let it in, genuinely restful. The world is larger than our worries. The ocean is deeper than our concerns. The whales were here before us, and with enough care, with enough of the clear-eyed recognition that they deserve to continue, they will be here long after. Chapter 14. 100 miles of darkness. Let us go somewhere before we sleep. Somewhere we have not been yet tonight. Somewhere that almost no human being has ever been. Out into the open ocean. Not the coastal ocean, not the ocean you can see from a beach or a cliff top or the window of a plane. The true open ocean, the pelagic zone, the part of the ocean that lies beyond the continental shelf, beyond the shallow water that surrounds the edges of the continents and extends outward in every direction for thousands of kilometers of water so deep that the bottom is simply not a relevant feature of the landscape. In the open ocean, there is no bottom. Not in any practical sense. Not in any sense that matters to the creatures that live here. There is only water. Above you, the surface kilometers away perhaps. Below you, more water. Around you, in every direction, more water still. No landmarks, no reference points, no sense of scale that your body knows how to process. Just ocean. And in that ocean, moving through it as easily as you move through a room, as naturally as a bird moves through airwales. Imagine floating here, suspended in the dark water of the deep, open ocean, weightless, surrounded by a darkness so complete that the difference between your eyes being open or closed is imperceptible. The temperature is cold, a few degrees above freezing. The pressure is enormous, hundreds of atmospheres pressing in from every direction. There is no sound you would recognize, no wind, no traffic, no voices, no machinery. Only the ocean, which is not silent. The ocean is never silent. There is the distant low rumble of shipping containers crossing between continents in the dark somewhere far above, their engines sending low-frequency sound through the water for hundreds of kilometers. There is the sound of the water itself, the deep, slow movement of currents that have been flowing for centuries, carrying cold water from the poles toward the equator in the great conveyor belt of ocean circulation that regulates the climate of the entire planet. And then, something else. A sound so low you feel it more than hear it. A pulse. Long, deep, below the range of conscious hearing, felt more as a vibration in the chest, in the bones, than as a sound in the ears. It comes from somewhere to your left. Far away, perhaps 50 kilometers. Perhaps further, a blue whale, calling, The sound moves through you and past you and continues outward in all directions, losing almost no energy as it travels, carrying its meaning, whatever meaning it carries, through the dark water at 1,500 meters per second. It will reach the other side of the ocean basin eventually, in whatever form it still holds when it gets there. You hang in the dark water, and then, from somewhere behind you, perhaps 30 kilometers away, perhaps 100, the faintest suggestion of a response. Another call. A different frequency. A different whale. Answering. Or perhaps not answering. Perhaps calling for its own reasons, in its own direction, toward its own destination. Two enormous minds moving through the dark water of the open ocean, each one carrying 50 million years of evolutionary history in its body. Each one navigating by senses we do not possess, toward destinations we cannot know, in a world we cannot inhabit, calling to each other, or calling into the dark. Either way, continuing, as they have always continued, through every ocean this planet has ever had, through every change this world has ever made. Patient, ancien, alive. Chapter 15. The breath. There is one more thing. Before we sleep, something small, something simple, something that happens right now, somewhere on the surface of every ocean on Earth. A whale breathes, not dramatically, not with the enormous breach and the spray and the spectacle that we imagine when we picture whales, just quietly a surfacing, the blowhole breaking the surface, an exhale, that warm, moist column of air rising into the cold above the water, condensing, visible for a moment, then gone. An inhale, deep, slow, the enormous lungs filling, and then the whale goes down again, back into its world, back into the dark, and the pressure, and the cold, and the extraordinary, ancient business of being alive in the ocean. This happens thousands of times every day, across every ocean, in the North Atlantic, and the South Pacific, and the Southern Ocean, and the Arctic, and the Indian Ocean, and every body of water connected to every other body of water on this planet. Thousands of whales, surfacing, breathing, going down, right now, while you lie in the dark of your room, while your own breathing slows, while the weight of the day falls away and the thoughts grow quieter and the body settles into the particular ancient peace of a mammal preparing for sleep. The whales are breathing, as they have been breathing for 50 million years. In and out, the same rhythm, the same ancient need, shared across every ocean and every species and every impossible distance with you, right now. Breathing. Final sleep sequence. It is time to rest now. Let your body settle. Heavy, warm, supported. Let your breathing slow. In and out, in and out. Somewhere, right now, a humpback whale is singing. In water warmer than the Arctic, colder than the tropics. Somewhere in between. The song rises through the water, those long, structured phrases, those themes that repeat and evolve, traveling outward through the ocean in all directions, hundreds of kilometers. Perhaps further, finding other whales, or finding no one, continuing anyway. Somewhere, a sperm whale rests at the surface, the great rectangular head barely moving, breathing slowly, having returned from 3 kilometers of darkness, recovering, the enormous lungs filling and emptying, in and out. Somewhere in the cold water of the Antarctic, a blue whale moves, slowly, steadily, its body longer than 3 buses placed end to end, moving with the quiet efficiency of an animal built for the long run, not hurrying. The ocean is not a place for hurry. The ocean is a place for patience, for the long, steady movement toward what you need. Let that rhythm find you now. Not urgency, not effort, just the slow, steady movement of a body that knows where it is going, that has been going there for 50 million years. Let your thoughts slow, like the deep current, like the patient movement of water across the floor of the ocean. Let your breathing be the only thing. In and out. Ancien, steady, unbroken. The whales will still be there when you wake, moving through their dark, extraordinary world, singing their songs, following their roots, carrying their knowledge across generations. In the deep water, patient, alive, and you are here, safe, still, breathing. Sleep